Now, I'm going to work from the assumption that all of us gathered here are thankful, grateful people. If by chance you struggle to feel thankful, do not worry and do not feel judged. We all have seasons and times where we struggle to see the blessings that surround us, where we struggle to see the ways that God is reaching towards us. So if you find yourself in that season at any point, then please speak to a trusted, non-judgmental friend or a mentor. Somebody who is wise in the blessings of the Lord and who can help you move through the season that you find yourself in. But for those who are not in that season, I assume that we are thankful people. The question is, the main question that has been with the church from day one and still stands strong for the church and its members to answer. The main question is, how do we show thankfulness? Let me share with you a personal story. I'm about 10 years old. My grandparents lived on a farm. They're surrounded by farmland. And in the wintertime, after the corn stalks had all been cut down, there were large hills that formed. The way the wind blew the snow around, there were, nice sized, not large, probably about, yay high. Yeah. And of course, as most people do in the country, they had a snowmobile. But one day, I went out, don't remember asking for permission, but saw those hills there in the field and couldn't resist the temptation. Now, at that point, I was a big fan of the show The Dukes of Hazzard. Anybody here remember The Dukes of Hazzard? How they would always take that car and they'd hit a ramp or a broken bridge and they'd fly through the air shouting, "Yee-haw!" Well, I'm looking at this hill on my snowmobile and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be fun. So I put the hammer down, pulled that throttle, full force, raced towards that hill, and not having thought it through, didn't think snow is not necessarily very solid. So I hit that hill and buried that machine right in the midst of the snowdrift. There was no yeehaw for me. It's oh no, what am I going to do now? Well, God bless him, my grandpa saw the trouble that I got myself into. I could imagine him watching me racing towards this hill saying, oh no, oh no, oh no. And so he trudges up, which it wasn't a short distance that he had to get out to grab me. So he trudges this distance through a snow-covered field and by sheer brute strength hauls that machine out of the snowbank. Well, I can tell you folks, I was so thankful to be free. And to show my thankfulness, I hopped back on that machine and raced back home. And then got myself stuck there too. My poor grandpa is still way out in the field. And I am stuck at home, and he, the man who trudged all the way out there to rescue me, now has to trudge all the way back home and rescue me again. Now, we laughed about this around supper tables until the day he died. You may hear the story and say, well, what an ungrateful child. And you know what? I wouldn't blame you. If I was watching this scene play out, I would think also, what an ungrateful child. But I can tell you from the other side, the reality was I was so thankful. Oh, my heart was bursting with gratefulness that I'm now free. And I expressed that freedom by racing off. The question is, how do we show thankfulness? Now let's take a look at today's Bible passage. Jesus got himself consistently into trouble for one reason. He preached an upside-down world. Well, actually, from God's point of view, it's a right-side-up world. The world that we live in, that Jesus preached in, was an upside-down world. And Jesus preached about turning it around the way it should be, the way God intended it to be. And whenever anybody says the way things are not the way they should be, they are in trouble. Consistently, bar none. Because people have a vested interest in the way things are, whatever that interest may be. So he preached about an upside-down world, or a right-side-up world, within an upside-down world. And in that right-side-up world, outsiders have a place. Outsiders belong. They are part of God's good dream. But we have them on the outside. And Jesus consistently lifted up or called in the outside. Consistently. Women had a place in Jesus' ministry. And I'm not talking about just on the sidelines or just talking serving meals. They had an integral part in the ministry of Jesus. They didn't in the world around them. They were homemakers and mothers. That was their role. That was their purpose. They didn't have power. They didn't have a voice. But Jesus gave that to them. Here we have a scenario in today's reading where Jesus encounters lepers. And lepers clearly stand on the outside. And I hate to say this, but not necessarily for bad reasons. Leprosy at that time was a highly contagious skin disease that had horrible consequences. It was transmittable via physical contact, skin-to-skin contact. And so lepers had to stand on the outside. They couldn't belong. And here's the tough thing. Imagine, if you will, how it would feel to never again be able to hug your loved ones. To never again be able to shake the hand of a stranger that you meet. To never again be able to sit down at a meal with people you know and love. Imagine the loneliness. Now, lepers tended to congregate together because they shared a condition. But that didn't make it any less lonely. That would be like saying, oh, prison isn't lonely because people who share the same condition are together. And yet one of the loneliest places in the world you will ever find today is in a prison, no matter how many people are there. They stood on the outside. And there were rules governing how lepers were to behave. They were separated, of course, from the general community. They had to wear bells and make noise to signify to anybody else that they were lepers. Now talk about even greater isolation. If they saw somebody coming towards them on the road, had to leave the road and make sure that those approaching knew that those approaching were coming towards lepers. In every sense, the condition would have been incredibly isolating. And so today's Bible reading says the 10 kept their distance, but raised their voices. And they yelled out, "Master, have mercy on us." Jesus doesn't touch them. At other times he does. He will physically touch the leper to heal. This time he doesn't. He gives them an instruction. Go and show yourselves to the priests. Now that may sound like an odd instruction for us, but in the law of Moses, if you were healed of any visible skin condition, you were to immediately go to the priest in Jerusalem, and you were to show yourself to them. And the priest would label you, would search you, and label you as either potentially clean or not clean. And if you were potentially clean, then there was a process to follow to be fully clean and welcomed back, fully clean, fully healed. Those terms are used interchangeably for skin conditions. And then welcomed back into the community. So Jesus says to them, doesn't touch them, just says to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. They're not healed in this moment. It is only after they turn around to follow his instruction. You talk about an act of faith there. It's when they follow his instruction that they find they are healed. And they continue. 10 of them walking together. One of them realizes as they're heading this way towards Jerusalem, one of them realizes what's really happening. And he turns around and comes back to Jesus. The other 9 keep going. One comes back, and the one who comes back is a Samaritan. Samaritans, in the eyes of Jews of that day, were lower than dogs. They did not fit. They were the apostate Jews. Those who broke away from the true faith to start their own faith. They were considered pond scum. 1 out of 10 came back to Jesus. And that one was the outsider. Jesus will then say, as this one who is an outsider shouts out glory to God, shouts out praise at the top of his lungs, kneels down at Jesus' feet, crying out praise and glory to the God Most High. Jesus says, weren't 10 healed? Why has only one, who's an outsider, come back? Now that passage, that bit, sounds like a condemnation of the 9. I don't think it was meant to be like that, though. I don't think that's what Jesus intended when he spoke this. I think what Jesus was saying was lifting up the outsider. The 9 have continued. They're thankful. Let's face it, you could not be healed of leprosy and see the potential to be welcomed back into normal community life. You could not be trudging towards Jerusalem. Oh, well, I guess I'm healed. I guess I've got to hug my wife and have dinner with my family. You wouldn't do that. These 9, I can almost guarantee you, are vibrating with the gift that's been given to them. And to show their thankfulness, what they have done is follow Jesus' instruction. And as the one comes back, I believe what Jesus is doing is lifting up not only the obedience of 9, but also the joy of the one. The one who now stood outside because he was a leper, because he was a Samaritan. Jesus is welcoming him in to his circle in the midst of Jews who consider a Samaritan lower than low. You see, as much as Jesus may be pointing at the 9 who have now returned, he's pointing to those who surround him, to those who do see the Samaritan as less than. And Jesus is saying, listen to him glorifying God. This is what God's world is supposed to be. Now, we can lift up the one. I believe that we can honor the other 9. They followed Jesus' word in and as an act of faith. That was it. Jesus didn't say, if you go to the priest, I promise I will heal you on the journey. All Jesus said was go. They didn't know what would happen. I'm sure they had hope, but they didn't know. It was an act of faith that led them to follow Jesus' word. It was an act of devotion that led one back to Jesus to praise and glorify God. I believe both of them are appropriate responses to a gift given. appropriate responses to a blessing poured out upon them. Which leads us now to ask ourselves the question. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to give you answers here. I'm not going to tell you what you have to do. I'm going to ask you the question. How do we, as church members, as those called into Christ's body, as those living within a good world that God has made, how do we show thanks? So Thanksgiving today, I'm not going to tell you how to be a thankful person or why you should be a thankful person. I'm just going to hang that question upon you. How do we show thanks? Say, back when I was 10, I was labeled as an ungrateful child for doing what I did. Because I didn't show thanks. Oh, as I say, my heart was bursting. I was so grateful. But others didn't see it. And thankfulness is a call to show. So how do we show thanks? Sometimes it's a way of habit. For example, and I talked about the meal that Crystal's going to make for tomorrow. And I will be very, very, very thankful to have that meal. But it doesn't matter whether I am served, when I come home from work, whether I am served a 4-course steak meal or craft dinner. After every meal, I say, "Thanks, hon, for supper." But there are many other times where I miss the opportunity to show thankfulness. I'll feel it, but I'll miss the opportunity to show it. Now, I've worked in ministry now for about a quarter of a century. I have connected intimately with probably about 24 or so different congregations. And in every one of them, and in others that I've talked with my colleagues about, and in others further still that I've only had the chance to read about, I keep seeing the same question. How do we show thanks? It's really easy for us as we sit here together to feel grateful for those who are sitting in a different pew but have done something wonderful. It's easy to feel thankful that you're sitting with your family. It's easy to feel thankful for many things as we gather together in community. But how do we show it? It's easy when somebody comes up and announces who was involved in a big thing that we accomplished. It's easy to show thanks by going, "Yeah, thank you." But how do we connect our thankful hearts with those we're grateful for? How do we show thanks? I was talking earlier that the example came to me of being in a restaurant. Now, often we show thankfulness for good service by leaving a good tip. But as Canadians, we're a very interesting lot because if we get really bad service, we'll still leave a good tip. You go, I'm going to challenge you next time you're out in a restaurant. If you get great service, gush over your server. Yeah. And be specific. Thank you so much for fill in the blank. You did a wonderful job doing fill in the blank. And actually, before I get to what you'll see, I also challenge you to do it if you don't get great service. I'm going to challenge you the next time you're at a restaurant and get substandard service, I'm going to challenge you to find the blessing and commend the server for that. I'm not talking about justifying bad service, but look at the look on your server's face. Whether the service was good or not, you lift up that server, you are going to see two things. You are going to see a very big smile, and you are going to likely see a look of strong surprise. Because that server, 9 times out of 10, will get nothing. Except maybe the tip. But will not get a word from those whom he or she has served. And so when you lift up that server, the look of shock and surprise, and the look of a heart overflowing is going to touch your heart. I guarantee it. If I'm wrong, well then you let me know. You can actually stand up here in church on a Sunday morning and interrupt my sermon and say, Troy, I did what you told me to do and it was wrong. That is how sure I am that I am right. Actually, I doubt anybody here would actually stand up in the middle of a message and say you're wrong, would you? I better not ask that question. Never ask questions you don't want the answer to. So how do we show thankfulness is the question for us. Now, I said I've worked for a quarter of a century in churches, and I see it with church workers. I'm just talking about ministers. In fact, as a public person, I tend to get the most praise of church workers. And that applies to preachers, because you have the opportunity to grab me as I walk out the door and tell me whether you believe it or not, nice sermon. And yes, I know people say it when they don't believe it. But you know what? I'm still thankful. I'm thankful for the opportunity that even as you're saying it, whether you believe it or not, that I get to shake your hand and say, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Even if I didn't hit a home run today, thank you. So there's a chance for both to show gratefulness. But when you look at other church workers, both paid and volunteer, they tend to do more behind the scenes stuff. And we're thankful for it. We're thankful that the phones get answered in the office throughout the week. But how many of us, myself included, I'm not pointing a finger at anybody here, how many of us have said to the person manning the phone, thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you did today. I know when we have a volunteer phone person in, which we do occasionally, then I say thank you because it's out of the norm. But I gotta admit, I don't often say it to my coworker. Yeah, I got people waving their finger at me. And yeah, I deserve that, because we miss the opportunity to show things. We may feel it, but we miss the opportunity to show it. Now, I'm not going to give you the 3-step program how to show thankfulness. I'm not going to do that to you today. I only want you to hold on to that question. In the moments that you find yourself, I want you to hold that question. How do I show thanks? In that moment when you feel your heart just beating in joy, just say, now how do I show thanks? So I trust we're thankful people. But how do we live that? See, and it's in that living that we see the light of Christ. The Samaritan came back praising and glorifying God with all his might. He showed thankfulness. He went above and beyond what he was told to do and showed his thankfulness in greater ways. You can look at it, the 9 served in a restaurant that left a 12% tip. They did what they were supposed to do. The one praised his server. Who had the greater impact? Both of them did what they were supposed to do. Both groups did what they were called to do. But who had the greater impact on the world around them? That's what our call for us. We're called to not just exist in this world. We're called to impact this world. Jesus didn't say live every day. He said be salt and light every day. Change the world you are in. Don't just journey through it, change it. Don't just exist in it, change it. Because this world that we think is right side up is actually upside down. And we're called to be the change agents to turn this world into the vision that God has planned, into the vision that the Spirit is now working. And a great part of that, my friends, hangs on that question. How do we show thankfulness?